Well, welcome to another Moffcast podcast. And today I've got an exceptional guest, a guy who you will instantly know when you've seen him on here or hear him. In actual fact, he won 2 Rugby World Cups. He's got a better win than a loss record against the All Blacks, and there aren't too many Australians that can say that, especially captains. We'll talk about that kick in 2000, and he's also in the World Rugby and Rugby Australia Hall of Fame, and absolutely 100% deserved. So I could actually go on and on and on, because when I looked at Wikipedia, there was so much that John Eales has done in rugby and also post-rugby. So it's a big welcome, Ealesy, and thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's a pleasure. Nice to have a chat.
Yeah, it is. So I'd like to start off with the 2000 kick. Right, I was talking to a local cocky here the other day, and I said, I've got John Eales coming on the podcast. And he said, you be sure to remind him that I still haven't forgiven him for that 2000 kick at the Cake Tin. And I well remember it, because it won the Bledisloe Cup for Australia, and they've been few and far between in recent years, obviously. What was going through your mind as you were lining up that kick? I mean, it was from the left-hand touchline from memory.
Yeah, a bit generous to say it was from the touchline. Well, I think it was a little bit easier than that. But look, I suppose if you look at it, just reflecting on your opening comments there, it was probably better that I have 5 million New Zealanders who won't forgive me than however many Australians who wouldn't forgive me if I had have missed it.
Absolutely.
But look, we had so many tight matches with the All Blacks through that era, and so many were decided, in the last minutes, at the latter stages of games, and that was a moment I had the opportunity to either make it or break it, and I think what goes through your mind initially, it's you're very nervous, like you think, because I hadn't had a kick that day, and I didn't realise Sterling Mortlock was off the field, so I had to. I knew it was my kick once I realised he was off, and then you line it up, and you've got the adrenaline rushing through. But I think as a kicker, you've got to make sure you relax and can get back into an optimal state of arousal, like not too much and not too little.
Yeah.
And I had a set routine that I had developed over the years, which allowed me to come back to that state where I felt, I could, actually treat it for what it was, a kick with a closed skill in the game of rugby. And interestingly enough, when I was quite young, I was at Ballymore, and I trying to learn as much as I could. And I heard Grant Fox was in town, and I was probably only 19, 20 at this stage. Had just made my way into the Queensland squad, and Grant was conducting a goal kicking clinic for a series of coaches at a coaching conference that was on there. And so I sort of stood in at the back of that class at Ballymore on the Oval, and I really watched him and learnt from him, and then read his book subsequent to that. And he was actually instrumental in helping me, like not specifically what he said, but just the process he went through in developing the technique, if you like, the routine that I developed. Which would have been different to his, but I think the important thing is not what your routine is, it's that you have a routine.
Yeah.
So in those moments where it's really tense, you can slip into that routine.
Yeah, Ballymore is a favourite ground of mine, because I played for GPS Old Boys, and that was when their ground was just across the river from Ballymore. Before they moved out to your old stamping ground at Ashgrove.
Finsbury Park, I think it was.
Yeah, Finsbury Park. And I remember I used to do the goal kicking for the seconds, because at Jeeps, David Clark was the first fullback,
Yeah.
my hair wasn't as immaculate as Clarkie's, you know. I was never going to make it. But no, I on one season, I kicked my 100th point at Ballymore, and that's something that will remain with me. Never at your level, though. But it's interesting, Ealesy, I mean, how many goal-kicking second rowers of an international standard are there?
Well, I've met a couple over the years, and I think you had to go back to the 70s, and I think Gordon Brown, the Scottish
guy, yeah. Uh-huh.
And I think there was a South African or something. But look, there haven't been many.
No.
And certainly, I think it would be a surprise if we saw one again in the in times. And in many ways, it was an indictment on how poor our backs were as kickers that step up and actually kick. And probably a product of the fact that we had the world's best kicker playing for Queensland in Michael Liner. So he was always kicking, and therefore no one else practiced. But I used to muck around a bit at training, and then when he wasn't there, no one else could kick. So John Connolly was the one who told me to have a go at it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You mentioned before about if you'd missed that kick, then you'd have had 5 million Aussies dislike you. Having told us today that to the extent to which Grant Fox helped mould your kicking style, I'm not so sure that there are going to be too many Kiwis that actually think that's such a great thing. But Foxy's a great guy. I had a lot to do with him, and I'm hoping to get him on the podcast at some stage. But his son's doing really well in golf. He's really doing well. And I think your son plays cricket for Mossman, from what I understand. Is that correct?
Yeah, he does. And they actually won the first grade premiership there for the first time in 83 years.
Is that right?
Yeah, probably 4 or 5 weeks ago now. I think they're still celebrating. So it was wonderful, actually, because we all went back to because they won first and second grade. And that's the first time in history that they've done that.
Right.
But first time they've won the A-grade premiership in 83 years. And we're down at the local hotel, the Moho, as they call it, which sponsors the guys. And we're there after the game. And who should rock in but Alan Border,
who played for Mossman. Yeah.
Played for Mossman, and actually they play on Alan Border Oval.
Oval, yeah.
So they didn't play the final. That was on a neutral ground, and it was a 3-day game.
Yeah.
It was really wonderful to see how much the boys enjoyed it, and really, I think it's a great reminder of how important club sport is as a building block in any code, any sport, and the passion that people have. And in some ways, I think, and I was reflecting with Peter Forrest, who was the coach of the team, and he also played. He wasn't the captain; he was the coach, and he played for Australia, Peter.
Yeah.
A number of years ago, but he's done an excellent job. And I reflected with him. I said, look, club rugby or cricket or whatever club sport is often one of the hardest levels to coach, because you have a group of people who have such disparate motivations playing. Some are just happy it's the highest level that they're ever going to play, and they're happy. Some are just popping into the team and out of the team any given week. They've all essentially, mostly, are all amateur. Some are on their way on a stepping stone to become representative. Some are maybe coming down that ladder, being representative. So you've got this really interesting collection of people, and somehow you've got to find the common thread that will take them in and connect them with themselves as a team, as a club, and as a community as well. And Peter Forrest did a fantastic job doing that. And the joy the young guys had playing with guys like that. There's a name to watch is a guy by the name of Lockie Hearn, scored 140 odd in the final.
Oh, right.
He's playing for New South Wales now, but I would suggest he's definitely a player of the future. I'm sure we'll be involved in a few Trans-Tasman tussles in the years. So really good to watch.
Well, I played for Mossman up at Rawson Oval, which is not far from, and of course our local watering hole at the time was the Buena Vista, which you most likely know.
No, well.
Yeah, so Oh, I've got fond memories of playing with Mossman. Yeah, I mean, is your son a bowler or a batsman?
He's a bit of both. He was more picked as a bowler in this team. He sort of opened the bowling, batted number 8. So, but really, he enjoyed it. He enjoys doing both.
Yeah. Is he as tall as you, or?
No, he's not. He's a bit stockier than I was at that age, but he'd be about, well, if I was 6'7", 6'8", he'd be probably about 6'3", 6'4", around.
Oh, that's okay for a fast bowler, mate, because the ball's coming from a great height.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the other things that I'm intrigued by, Ailsey, is the transition that you made from playing to business. And it's a transition that some players make easily, and other players struggle with, because they've, especially these days when they're all wrapped up in being professional rugby players, and some players don't give much thought to life after rugby. And I know there's a lot of work that's done by the players' associations and by the rugby unions to try and address that particular issue. But nevertheless, it can be difficult for some players. And I don't know if you played against him, but I did a podcast with a guy called David Corkery. He played for Ireland. He was a back rower with Ireland. And he got himself into a very, very dark place. He had to finish playing when he was 27 because of 2 Achilles problems. And he got into a deep depression. And we talked about this, and it's when the phone stops ringing, all of a sudden you're in this very, very rarefied atmosphere. Injury, boom, it's all gone. How did you manage that transition?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. There's probably a few components to it. Number one, I think you need to check yourself as to where you get your sense of self-worth from. And if you get your sense of self-worth from the game, or from people you don't know coming up and saying, well played, or great tackle, or great kick, or whatever, then you're probably in a bit of trouble in making that transition. Whereas I think if you get your sense of self-worth from how hard you're working to achieve something, from your friends and your family, from not necessarily the game, but from your achievements and working hard, well then I think that puts you in a better position. And I got some really good advice very early in my rugby career. And rugby was amateur for half my career, and I think that really helped me prepare for life afterwards. I always wanted to study. I studied, and then I worked for the first half of my career, and I always found I kept doing something while I was playing as well. But in 1992, in my second year playing for the Wallabies, I was on a trip to Ireland and Wales, and I jumped in a cab going somewhere, and the Irish cabbie in Dublin, he recognised me. He started talking about the rugby, and then at the end of the conversation, we talked the whole time. At the end of the conversation, said, "Look, John, just one thing: you're playing sport now. You're going to be doing other things in life." He said, "Just always, if I can give you one bit of advice, it's to love what you do, not what you did." And I've never forgotten that, because it's wonderful advice, because it talks about living in the present for the future rather than living in the past. And so for me, it was really around that. And another great mate of mine, Chris White, he used to say, when you retire, you need to think about you retire to something, not from something. And so I think both those bits of advice is about looking to the future. And I think rugby or sport, any day can be your last playing sport.
Yeah.
And it can be all taken from you, and you won't necessarily control that choice. No matter how hard you work, elements of luck come into it. So I think it's being prepared and always thinking, okay, and I always had in the back of my mind, if it all ended today, this is what I would do tomorrow. And that thing I would do tomorrow changed many times.
Yeah, sure.
I always had in mind that there was a next step if it all ended.
That's a brilliant piece of advice, Ailsey. In actual fact, it's most likely a good bit of advice for me, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't tend to live in the past. I mean, I do. We might get onto it a little bit, you know, in terms of the way the game's being played at the moment. But you know, not in a way in which you know, I think is overly critical. But you know, I do have some points of view in respect of that. But that, I think, is a very, very good bit of advice. And anybody watching this, especially any players, current players that are watching this. So did you, you know, you obviously, besides being a great rugby player, you're a highly intelligent guy who's thought a lot about a lot of things. So what did you end up doing when you, and what are you doing now also? I'd be very interested to know.
Yeah, look, I studied, I did a Bachelor of Arts degree. When I finished school, I knew I wanted to study and did well at school, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I suppose one of the things I really am so pleased as I look back over my life, I haven't followed things because they've been the natural or the normal way of doing things necessarily. I followed things because I've loved them or have been curious about them. And while I could have studied a lot of different things, I was curious about psychology, and I studied that. And then rugby sort of took over, and I thought, well, here's an opportunity. I'm just going to go headlong into this, as you know, just really experience this, and then exhaust my interest in playing the game, which I felt I did. And then when I left playing rugby, I joined BT Financial Group, and I just wanted to get an insight into bigger business. And then I set up my own business, which was a consulting business with a partner. He was based in Melbourne, I was based in Sydney, and we built that up. And it was anything around people in organisations. So anything around the HR function or leadership or culture. And we built that up and then sold that business. And then from then on, I've pretty much taken a role where I've stepped into a few non-exec director roles, and then taken the opportunity to invest in a few different businesses and I try to take an active role where I invest in something. So at the moment I'm on the board of Flight Centre Travel Group, Magellan Financial Group, and a group called Trajan Group Holdings, which is in the analytical and life sciences space. I'm the chair of that latter business of Trajan, and we floated the business last year, had an IPO, and so we've been listed for coming up to a year now, coming up to 12 months. And then there's a few private businesses which I've invested in, and some for, you know, I tend to be a long-term holder if I can. So one of the businesses I've been investor in for 12, 13 or 14 years now. So it's in the agricultural sector.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Very, very interesting. And then, so really just try to take an active involvement in different things like that.
So you've got a very full life. And I think that's one of the secrets of never having been in your position as a player, but I managed to have a reasonable career in rugby administration. And when I finished with Wales, I pretty much had enough, you know, but within 12 months, I sort of wondered what I'd done by leaving when I was so young, you know. And in that, so I started my own consultancy and had quite a bit of success with that. That was just my own personal thing. And now I'm doing this, you know. I mean, I regard this as when I was refereeing in Sydney, I used to regard refereeing as my relaxation. And that might sound strange, but for 80 minutes plus halftime, you couldn't think about anything else.
Yes.
You know, you were always, you're concentrating 100%, you know, trying not to get anything wrong. And so I always found, as I said, that was my relaxation. You know, it's important, I think, for everybody to try and, you know, have as much fun as they can with what they're doing. But I used to enjoy it because I would referee Wallabies. You can always remember the best game of rugby I ever refereed was at TG Milner. And I was refereeing Randwick and Eastwood. And Ian Williams was playing for Eastwood and Campo was for Randwick. And they just ran the ball. I mean, it was just fantastic.
Yeah.
You know? And it's the same with podcasts. I get an opportunity to talk to guys like yourself, find out a bit more about you. Let people that might listen to this do the same. And so, you know, it falls into the category that I'd never thought about until you mentioned it, which is love what you do, not what you did.
Yeah. I mean,
that's brilliant. It's blown me away, actually.
No, look, it was such great advice. And so, as I said, that was back in 1992. So
yes.
30 years ago, and I still remember it, and still, you know, it's probably one of the maxims I would live by. But yeah, I think it's really important in life to follow your curiosity, and then you might dive deep into something for a while, and then you might find you don't like it, and that's a good thing to find out you don't like something, because you won't go back there. But,
yeah.
My life's been very full, very interesting, and I'm very fortunate to have grown up in a large, loving family, and to have a great family now, and you've got those things you fall back on all the time.
Yes, I mean, and of course, I would like to drag you back now a little bit to rugby matters. I know you were on the board of Australian Rugby for a while, and I think it's really good that ex-players actually see the other side of things from being on a board, you know, about a lot of the difficulties that the board members and also the executive deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I've been on several of those, obviously, starting with New South Wales. I can remember when I went to New South Wales, you know, there was this sort of hate relationship between New South Wales and Queensland, which, when Doyley was the chief executive of Queensland, we got on like a house on fire. You know, we really did some good stuff together, you know, and I could never quite understand why and it was most likely because New South Wales didn't ever believe that Queensland should have ever won anything, but of course they did, you know. But I mean, so I think that is very valuable to have somebody like yourself sit on the other side of the table. But in respect of the rugby, I mean, there's been a lot of rubbish, to be perfectly honest with you, spoken about by New Zealand Rugby Union in recent years. You know, I'm not going to ask you to get into the debate about whether they're right or they're wrong. I've said enough about how wrong I think they are over here. And it's interesting because for the first time in a while, we've had a couple of Australian sides beat New Zealand sides on the weekend. And I wanted to know what you thought about that and whether you think that they can maintain that momentum, because I think it would be fantastic, not only for Australian rugby, but for New Zealand rugby, if they were not to win everything all the time. And also for world rugby.
Yeah, well, complacency is an issue. And like, I think of all teams that avoid complacency, you know, relative to the success they've had, the All Blacks have been outstanding at avoiding complacency. And you'd have to put sides like the Crusaders in similar bracket to that, with all the success they've had over a long period of time. But there is no question that for the game in Australia and New Zealand, in our corner of the world, that it's better if it's a competition. And you look at how alive the game was in Australia when the Wallabies were successful and winning World Cups, and you could go through and actually never win another World Cup as long as you won the Bledisloe Cup every few years. That would just breathe so much life and hope into the game. But it has been such a long time. Look, we've come close. We've been competitive. We try, but you know, we've lost the big moments, even not the big minutes of games. We've lost the big moments, and it'll just be an instant where the All Blacks can just turn it on, or we just can't hold on for that that little bit longer. So there's been a fair bit of pain over the last few years. So yes, last weekend, so good to see very strong performances from Australian teams. And, you know, the Waratahs is a really good example. People can get, you know, I think New South Wales supporters, Waratahs supporters judge very quickly, and they've had a bit of disappointment and some great success, particularly in 2014 when they won the championship. But that last year they went through a season and didn't win a game. This year they've gone back to a coach who came up through the Sydney club system.
Yeah, through Gordon. Yeah,
through Gordon and Warringah, he coached. He had premierships with both clubs, I think, and he's just brought them back to basics. Said we're not going to change overnight. They've got essentially a very similar roster to what they had last year.
Yeah,
and now they've won 6 or 7 matches. Yeah, this year, and they've beaten the Crusaders last weekend, and yeah, that's a phenomenal effort. And people were talking about it. I was at a function that night, and people were coming up who wouldn't usually comment on rugby. They said, "Oh, the Waratahs beat the Crusaders," and yeah, so it was great to see. And so, I mean, I grew up as a Queenslander, and you spoke about the hatred between Queensland and New South Wales, and it was like that on a Saturday, but I think when we came together as an Australian team, that all just disappeared.
Yeah.
It wasn't there. But being retired now, you can look at the game through a much bigger window. And you're right, having that experience on the board and recognising, I always knew it was hard administratively, but you don't realise, you can never realise the complexity of some of the issues you face. And people will come up with very simplistic solutions, but the simplistic solutions do not work.
No.
Like say, just focus everything on club rugby and everything will follow. It doesn't work like that.
No.
And equally, it doesn't work if you just focus everything on the Wallabies. You need both sides of the equation. I was on the board of the Australian Sports Commission, and you know, for a number of years, soon after I retired from rugby, and there was this constant battle between participation and elite. And that's a battle that sports like rugby face. Some sports don't face it as much when they're just running the head body of the game and not necessarily responsible for all the grassroots. And it's a challenge to get right. It's not as much of a challenge in New Zealand because you've got.
Well, I got to say, John, that basketball has now overtaken rugby in participation numbers in this country. And you know, if you'd said that to me a few years ago, I would have thought you're a bit crazy. But there are a lot of issues surrounding rugby at the moment, and I notice another one of the England players, ex-England internationals, has come out and said that rugby might be dead in 40 or 50 years unless there are certain changes made. Now, I don't agree with that, but there are some issues that rugby is facing at the moment, and obviously this whole head injuries one is front and center because, you know, that's the shop window to the world game is a professional game. And my concern at the moment is that, you know, not that they're not doing anything, because they are, you know, they've got some really strong protocols, much stronger than when you were playing and when I was administering. But what really worries me is that there are still a lot of people being treated for head knocks in a game of rugby, you know, and they go to the head bin. And then they get assessed, and they're either assessed as able to come back on. Most of them don't. So my point is, what's happening, even with all this focus on these head injuries, why are we still getting some of those, you know, head injuries which are causing players today? I mean, they're most likely not as frequent or as hard hitting perhaps as in the past, but they're still occurring.
Yeah, I think rugby's been ahead of the game with these things, ahead of other contact sports, you know, from an early stage. And I'll give you an example. When I played, I was knocked out twice. One was was actually at a recovery session coming down a water slide. That was one of the times, and the second time was in a game of sevens that I was playing. So that's probably a message not to play sevens or go down water slides. But you know, on both those occasions, we had return to play protocols in Queensland Rugby and Australian Rugby. So I wasn't allowed to play. Even though I got knocked out on a water slide on Monday night, I wasn't allowed to play on that Saturday.
Right.
I'd been knocked out. And in the return to play protocols, that was in 1994. And it was the same after sevens. It was a number of weeks I was out, 1994 and 1995. Now, there's probably been times and countries that have slipped on these standards more than others. But look, it's a live issue. Being a contact sport, you're never going to eliminate accidental contact. I think they're right in going very hard towards deliberate contact. I think they err sometimes. Some of the things that I've seen people get sent off for, or 10 minutes for, or 20 minutes for, depending on the thing, have been, they've been quite absurd. It's been a brush rather than anything else, and certainly nothing intended. But it is something we have to be very mindful of. And I think there's, you could go into other rules of the game, and the number of people on the field, the contact, the risks associated with it. How do you get the balance between preserving the integrity of rugby as a game? And I think I remember speaking to Rod McQueen about this on many occasions. He often spoke about the integrity of rugby. The thing that differentiates it from rugby league is the contest for possession.
Yes.
In rugby, there's a contest for possession at every moment, whether it's a scrum, a line-out, a ruck, a maul, a tackle. And in rugby league, the only contest for possession is if a ball is kicked in the air or it's a one-on-one contest for a strip. And that's fine, but the integrity and that preserving the contest for the integrity of the contest for possession preserves guys like me being able to participate in the line-out, because it gives you an advantage because you're taller, you can jump higher in the line-out. Guys that are short and stocky that can play in the front row of the scrum. If you take away the integrity of the contest for the scrum or the line-out, then you're probably going to take away a certain class of athlete to play the game, and therefore take away some of the essence of the game. But you've got to do this. You can't do that in a vacuum. You've got to do that with this consideration around what are the safety issues, protocols that you want to put in around this as well.
I mean, I got into trouble once with Phil Gould for calling rugby league 5-tackle kick, but I was defending his view that rugby had become like basketball on grass. This was just when Super Rugby started, when it was all defences hadn't caught up yet with all of the attack that was going on at the time. I do believe, though, that the game has become more of a collision sport than a contact sport of recent years, and that increasingly you're a big guy, you'd always get a game, doesn't matter where it evolves to, but the backs are now 100 kilos, and fast, and they spend a lot of time in the gym, my concern is that with that collision element, and I'm 100% with you, the game, whatever happens to it, there's got to still be an authentic game of rugby, because, and it is a game for all shapes and sizes. That's what we always, you go to rugby league, and they're all the same shape and size, except for a couple of taller guys might get a game. But, those are things worth, I think, preserving for rugby. But I would like to see the game, and I think it's this evolutionary thing. It is starting to open up a bit. We saw that with Ireland, and especially the French, on the recent Northern Hemisphere tour. And I'm very much in favour of teams playing to their style. I call it McDonald's rugby, John, at the moment, where everybody wants to play the game the same way. It's like going to McDonald's and ordering a Big Mac, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I would like to see the French play the French way, the Welsh, especially having been there, they've still got innate skills in their young kids, but it gets coached out of them. And of course, the running rugby of Australia, that was when you couldn't get a ticket to see the games, when you guys were playing, when it was that. And I know things evolve, but I do believe that there's a little room for developing your own style of play, even in the professional era.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be. And you know, for the game to change, it's going to require some people to be brave in how they play the game and do things differently. And look, that has been one of the great things about the All Blacks, is that they've led and they've won through playing great rugby. They haven't played negative rugby. So they've played and they've maintained that willingness and desire to attack. And attack doesn't mean you don't kick, because the All Blacks would kick as much as anyone in some respects, but they kick with a different purpose. So I think they have been very good leaders of the game on the field. But I think, you know, the comment from whoever it was that said, you know, rugby won't be a game in 40 years.
I think it was Ben K.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, like, I think it may not be in the form it is today. And I think that would be a good thing, because in 40 years, you would hope it's a bit of a different game.
Yes.
Somehow preserving the integrity. And it's going to take some brave administrators to say, we need to change before we are compelled to change through other environments and other reasons. So, you know, what does that mean? Does it mean you end up taking 2 players out of the scrum? Does it mean you end up, you know, increasing? I mean, it's hard to increase size of fields when you're constrained by the large international fields. But does it mean you restrict people from doing certain things on the field? Look, I don't know. I'm not as much of a student of the game as you need to be to come up with these ideas, but we need creative minds to turn their mind to, how can rugby be a game that preserves the integrity for the contest for possession, but still be a growing spectator sport?
Which is supported by parents. And of course, that's, you know, that's a very big thing, becoming even bigger. Mums and dads, you know, they're going to want to know that this is a game that's going to be safe for their kids to play. And I think it will get back to that. I will, after we finish, I'll just I'll send you something that I've done, and it's currently being considered by World Rugby. And that is, I've along with a few people, like guys like Robbie Deans and a few guys and referees, ex-referees, ex-administrators, we've come up with a game which is 11s rugby.
Right.
And it sits right in between 7s and 15s. It's 4 quarters of 11 minutes, which is 44 minutes. And we believe the ball in play time will be at least 40 of those 44 minutes. It's based around simplicity, safety, and fun. And I'll be very interested to get your thoughts on it, you know, because it's not something that I want to run. You know, I've said to Billy Beaumont, Sir Billy Beaumont, I've said, look, here's something which is like a turnkey option for you if you want to do it. You know, all we would like to do, we'd like to run, for example, one of the things we're looking at the moment is running an inter-varsity 11s competition, a global varsity competition playing 11s, because you can, you know, and it is actually, unlike 7s, it is more of a true game of rugby, because it's going to have those short, fat guys and the tall guys and the backs. Because the backs are pretty useless, as you forwards always tell us, we're actually, it's going to be a 6-5 split, 6 forwards, 5 backs. And it's not designed to replace 15s at all. But it is designed to say, okay, look, just like cricket has got different formats of the game, this is another format of the game, which people can consider playing. If they want to play it, yeah, they can. But it needs to get World Rugby to endorse it in order for people to be able to play it, or for governing bodies to say, okay, this has been endorsed by World Rugby, so then we can have it as part of our approach going forward.
Yeah, look, I'd be really interested to see that, because I think we do need to think creatively. And I know I played 7s, I played 10s, I played 15s, and 10s was a great, really interesting, fun form of the game to play. And it was hard, you're running, the ball was in play a lot more. But I think we've got to accept that, particularly when you're looking at this balance between participation and elite, the elite form of the game, and in cricket, that's Test cricket.
Yep.
No one else plays Test cricket in that form. I mean, yes, the Sheffield Shield cricket which will be 4 days, but it's at a very elite level, and obviously the different formats of that around the world, Sheffield Shield being the Australian version. But the more accepted level, not the more accepted, but the more participation form of cricket is one-day cricket.
Yeah.
50 overs, 40 overs, 30 overs, depending on the grade you play. And now, obviously, 2020 is a bit different, but to get all those rugby skills in an environment where there's less collision, still contact, but less collision is a good thing. And something I could see in 20, 30, 40 years where those forms of the game on the same size pitch, involved with the same infrastructure of clubs, become the dominant form of participation. But while you've still got the elite level, fielding players from that, taking them to that elite level. And look, it may come to that. I don't know if it'll come to that, but we've got to be creative and brave in the way we think about it.
When I was refereeing, I used to referee a lot of the Waratah Shield in New South Wales, which involved all the schools, including state schools, rugby league playing schools. And you always knew when you were refereeing a state school because the halfback used to say, "Which side do you want me to put it in?" So,
yeah.
So, well, the loose head side would be good. But but I think something like 11s, for example, would be a good way into the state schools. And we in Australia, and we're not talking about I'm talking about in Australia, the game is under pressure from a whole lot of areas, but not the least of which is the private schools, which is where most of the rugby players come from, other than the Pacific Islanders, obviously, that pick up the game. And having been through that system myself, my son went to Shore, but even now in Shore, they've got way fewer number of rugby teams, than they used to have. They've got Australian rules being played there. I don't think they've got rugby league, but I think there's some argument for actually saying, how do we get into rugby league schools? Because not all rugby league players in schools actually who are playing there actually perhaps want to play rugby league. They might want to try this other form of the game.
Yeah, look, I think it's something we have to consider, because those regular nurseries that we always won't say took for granted, because there's been limited resources and they've always been valued. They're being challenged more now than ever. And I think in Australia, we confront more challenge. Like you talk about basketball in New Zealand, we've got basketball in Australia, and if you're the best Aussie rules player in the world, or if you're the best rugby league player in the world, you're playing in Australia.
Yep.
And so you've got those two behemoth competitions that you're also up against. Now, rugby has its place, and we love the fact it's international, but that's not going to appeal to everyone. And then we've got the challenge that it's great being international. We're in a global market, but then you've got global market forces that are at play too.
Yes.
So you might be able to get paid 2 or 3 times as much to play half as many games in Japan.
Yes.
As you would playing in Australia. So that is going to be attractive for some people, not all people, but some people. And New Zealand are seeing this. They're probably losing better players at a younger age.
Yep.
It's just you've got a better nursery to reinvigorate those ranks than what we have at the moment.
Yeah, although I've made a prediction about the next World Cup in I don't know how the draw works out, but I've suggested that the final will be played by France and one other. It's in France, and I didn't have the All Blacks as being one of the one others. I thought the one others would come from Ireland, South Africa, or Australia. And I think you guys got a good coach at the moment in Dave Rennie, but I could never understand why New South Wales, for example, went went for Queensland's different because, you know, the coach up there has been on both sides of the ditch for a while, but why they would go to a New Zealand coach instead of saying who was unproven at that level. I'm not, you know, being overly critical, but it's true. Who was unproven at that level. Why invest in somebody like that when you should be investing in somebody of your own homegrown, like, you know, what's the guy's name from Gordon?
Darren Coleman.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and they'd almost lost him, didn't they? Because he went, wasn't he going to go to America or something?
He did. He coached the Guillotines, or I think in the Major League Rugby or whatever it's called.
Yes.
And which is great. And I mean, that's been great. I've got a really close friend's son, and who's playing in the New York team at the moment, and loving it.
I've actually been doing quite a lot of podcasts with people in America, trying to understand, you know, what's happening in America with the Guillotines. That was named after a drink. The Guillotines, owned by an Australian with the same name as a famous cricketer.
yes. No, I know the story.
Yeah. And some other guys up there. Spoken to the guys at one of the universities about whether they'd be keen to, and it was Notre Dame, and I noticed that you actually do some stuff with Notre Dame from time to time. Is that right?
The Australian version.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, mate, listen, I could actually talk to you for forever and a day, John. But we have to finish sometime. Before I do, I'd like all the people watching this just to press the like button or the subscribe button or whatever you do, you know, because this is one of the best interviews I think that I've done. Well, most likely the best I've done, and certainly the best that I'll ever do. And John has given us a lot to think about, and I'd like to thank you, mate, for coming on and making the time, and I wish you all the very best in the future.
Thanks, David. It's a pleasure. All the best.
All the best, mate.